Douglas, what's your take on this?
Well, let me start by saying that I think most people who, members of the public, like all of us here, know that some limits are needed on what we know, that we can't have completely open access to all information and everything known to and by and from every single arm or agency of government. The idea that complete transparency is possible, I think, is a mistake, but the idea that it's desirable, I think, is fatuous. All sorts of things every single day go on which you and I may think we want to know, may deeply want to know, but which it may well be in our interests not to know. Why would it be? I mean, once you've agreed, as it were, that nations need police forces, armies, intelligence services to carry out the ordinary actions of democratic states, then you agree that certain things need to be kept from you. And I don't believe this new idea that, as it were, complete transparency is what people desire. If they do, I think they don't always realize the implications of that. I mean, the other thing I note is this. I mean, free speech campaigner has become the latest sort of Orwellian term. Free speech campaigner, Julian Assange isn't a free speech campaigner. He's a keyboard teenage anarchist who's sort of trying to figure out a philosophy as he goes along and has now landed on free speech campaigner. He isn't about free speech. He's for complete transparency for everyone but himself. Free transparency for everyone but his own organisation. It's not a campaigner on behalf of freedom of speech. What this comes down to, what the WikiLeaks debate and others come down to, is who decides what we should know? Who decides what you and I should know? Once you grant that there's no possibility of complete transparency or no desirability on it, then you have to rely on someone else to know things for you and to act accordingly. I think the best system going for that is democratic government, with all its flaws and failings, that government in a society like ours has enough checks and balances that, yes, mistakes are made, undoubtedly, but that when they are made, they can also be remedied, they can be pointed out, and in extreme cases of ill-doing, can be rectified by whistleblowing. But, you know, the idea of, just two quick things finally, the idea, first of all, that we've learned anything much from WikiLeaks, I think, is a mistake. Most of the coverage in the media from this has simply either embedded people's present prejudices and preconceptions, or it's been tittle-tattle. Nobody needed to know, I don't think, that somebody in the State Department said to somebody else in the State Department that Vladimir Putin and Medvedev are the Batman and Robin of Russian politics. We didn't learn anything. We didn't learn anything from the fact that an American ambassador told somebody at the State Department that Berlusconi stays up too late at night with young women. Is that really something which needed the leak of millions of sensitive documents to tell us? I don't think so. There is, I would say finally, there's too much to know in the world. Has been probably for all time, but certainly over recent centuries. People need to find a way through this. In the age of the internet, there's so much to know that it's become, I think, almost impossible in recent years to do anything other than to embed a set of prejudices and ideas and ideals of seeing the world that you already hold. It's like what happens when you close your eyes in the dark. You see forms that you see in the day. We are led to seeing patterns. When you close your eyes, you often see figures. There's a reason for that. It's because we see so many figures in the day. When you look out into the mass of information that's now available on the internet, people tend to find the things they're most commonly seeing in the rest of their lives. So no, I don't think it's changed anything very much. The only thing it has done is it's massively jeopardized American national security by telling every foreign intelligence agency what America knows. And that is why Mr. Assange did it. And the idea that he's a free speech campaigner as opposed to an anti-American campaigner is unbelievable. Thank you.
I mean, Douglas, what do you make of all this? Because, I mean, it sounds like in general terms, first of all, it seems very hard to say anything in general terms which is really useful. because everyone says yes, there must be some limits, but we can't just come up with an abstract principle to determine them. But I mean, the view of your two fellow panelists here seems to be that to a certain extent, what recent events have shown is that the default needs shifting, and that whatever we think the right limit is, governments, people in power, have a tendency to keep more secret than they need to, and so we don't really have much to fear by people trying to push back those borders.
Well, it would depend what they were trying to push them back for, and when and where they were trying to push them back. I would simply observe the following, which is that, first of all, everyone approves of leaks when they support their own point of view. I mean, the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph were delighted when Stephen Moxon, who was working 10 years ago in the border agency, released the fact that mass immigration had gone out of hand and that the people in the agency knew it had gone out of hand. They were delighted. I mean, a lot of small C conservative types were delighted to have that information out in the public sphere. If you're a Guardian reader, it was more likely to say how irresponsible of Mr. Moxon to release this information. If you're an anti-American campaigner, or for instance you want America to lose the war in Afghanistan, you're likely to welcome any information which hampers the war efforts there by releasing information of either people on the ground, operational tactics, or your information network. So, as I say, I think the first thing is we have to be aware of the direction that this is coming from. And it is the stated aim of Mr. Assange and his colleagues to make America in particular so transparent that it can't operate as a state. Now, I would just observe that there are, in my opinion, all sorts of flaws of the United States of America, as there are with this country. But it's one of the best hopes going for democracy. And it's certainly a much better hope than, say, Russia. But it's noticeable that the FSB isn't the subject of leaks by Mr. Assange and his colleagues. So it's always directional. And I just make this other final point on this, which is what happens in war. I mean, it's why it's important to mention this thing of, for instance, the collateral murder video. There are processes within the military and with the intelligence services to root out wrongdoing. And the ultimate process in that, if you were to take the example that Annie's just given of, for instance, an intelligence agency which wanted to kill a prime minister, would be that somebody would leak, and in that case, of course, reductio ad absurdum, but in that case, that person would be celebrated and thanked for releasing that information and saving the life of the elected politician. Now, well, in some cases. But what happens in wars is, I mean, to anyone but naive, terrible in all sorts of ways, and all sorts of things go on. There's a wonderful book by Michael Burley that came out recently called Moral Courage, about what individual soldiers did in World War II. There were many occasions when people wrote things. It was common knowledge, a couple of generations ago. People would write postcards home and refer to, losing a particularly loved member of their battalion, and referring to, the fact we, quote, didn't take any prisoners that day. Now, what did that mean? You know what it means. I know what it means. It meant that they shot people who were surrendering. They killed enemy soldiers after they'd surrendered. Now, the question I would put is, no, that's not right. That's not good. But such things do go on and have always gone on in warfare. And for people who decide to select information in order to make one side in a war incapable of operating, and they don't know, by the way, they really don't know, the people who are leaking this information, what you learn from these documents. There are identifiable people in the documents. There are, what's more, many things that foreign intelligence agencies, including terrorists in Afghanistan, will have learned from these documents, like, for instance, the amount of time it takes to get a helicopter to the scene of an attack on US forces in Afghanistan. This is information which the enemies of those soldiers can't believe their luck in getting. And I think that to misread this as some universal principle, when it is in fact a very direct and targeted attack on America, is at best naive, and at worst, well, I won't say.
Yeah, well, Douglas, both of you will come back. Nigel, you've been itching for since you started, I think.
Yeah. Just very briefly, it seems to me that you're neglecting an aspect of this. Julian Assange worked in collaboration with some of the major newspapers, with some very reputable journalists who worked long hours to analyse the data, analyse what they were revealing, redact, interpret, and present to the wider world the discoveries which were of interest to the readers of these major newspapers. It's very bizarre if Julian Assange is just the enemy of America, that they should collaborate so extensively in that activity.
Can I answer quickly?
Very briefly, but anyone's come in.
Not absurd at all. I mean, first of all, he hawked his wares around to The Guardian, and they bought it until they fell out with him. Then he hawked his wares to The Telegraph. He'll hawk them to whoever pays him, to whoever supports him, and whoever works with it in the direction he wants. But even the journalists who've worked with him, and David Lee and Luke Harding at The Guardian, who recorded this moment that Assange now says he's suing them for, which he isn't, and he said he's going to sue me for, which he isn't, is that he said that he didn't mind if the names of Afghan informers came out because, quote, they've got it coming to them. He's extremely free with people's lives, and the journalists who he's worked with even acknowledge that the mass information being released is so vast that they can't know what's coming out and who it will be beneficial to.
Douglas, you said at the beginning that you think ultimately the democratically elected government is the only body we can really trust with this. There's nothing better, imperfect though it may be. I wonder what the other panellists make of that. But perhaps if you want to just sort of, because you were wanting to say something.
The question always comes back to who guards the Guardian, or in this case, who guards the Guardian's Guardian. And I would suggest, as I did at the outset, that there are better checks and balances within government, for all its flaws, than there are in, say, Mr. Assange's organisation. Wherever it is, whoever is in it, whoever funds it, none of these things we know. One other thing. I referred earlier to the fact of it being important to know which direction people are coming from. Annie just referred to the allegedly flimsy basis for the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. But it comes back to it again. I mean, Annie, you may answer this for me. I'll give you time to. Do you believe that Al-Qaeda flew the planes into the World Trade Center?
Who knows? We haven't had a proper full inquiry.
Do you believe that Al-Qaeda did that or not?
Well, some terrorists did it, yes. Al-Qaeda is a nebulous
Do
thing.
you believe
the concept is of a sort of franchise and ideology. It's not an organisation like the IRA.
Okay,
Douglas,
can I ask what's the reason for the question? Yeah. What's the reason for the question?
For some years, Annie, you've been attending 9/11 truther events which allege that the American government carried out those attacks. Have you not?
For many years.
And you've been involved in a case.
Sorry, would you like me to answer?
I'd love you to.
With my experience as an MI5 whistleblower, which involved blowing the whistle on 2 cases of dirty tricks attacks, I have spoken out about the need for internal vigilance, about who exactly is behind certain attacks. And all I've done is actually ask many times that we have a proper, full, frank, open inquiry into 9/11, because 9/11 has been used as the basis for the wars in the Middle East. It's been used for this nebulous war on terror, and it's also to this day being used as a reason to shred our civil liberties in our own countries. So this war on terror is based on something which I think many people feel uncomfortable with. That's
so
all.
come on, Annie.
Douglas,
do you think the American government was involved?
Douglas, if I was
You've
the
said
attorney,
many times you suspect they might have been.
Douglas, if I was attorney for Annie at this point, I would be saying objection, and I'd want you to sort of say why it is you're pushing this particular point about Annie's involvement in 9/11 in relation to the debate.
Because I think it's important, if somebody has gone down the route of conspiracy theory, that people know that therefore if they're supporting information coming out which is damaging to a state, that they put their own opinions on the table, frankly, and I think that Annie hasn't.
So I'm a whistleblower, have exposed crime on the part of the spies. I object to being called a conspiracy theorist.
Well, you've been spending recent years hanging around with them.
Thanks.